Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our next session, which is Policies to Fast-Track Deployment of EV Charging Infrastructure in India. Our session partner is WBCSD. I welcome Jasmeet and Apurva from WBCSD, and I welcome all our esteemed panelists, Mr. Avdesh Shah, Vice President, Photon Charge and Drive, Mr. Krishna Sharma, Vice President and Business Head, EVSE Execom, Mr. Maxon Lewis, Managing Director, Magenta Power, and Mr. Karthikeya Haryani, CEO and co-founder, Charge Zone. Jasmeet and Apurva, you could take it up from here, please.
Thank you, Amit. Let me quickly introduce the session and the topic for discussion, and then I'll pass on to Apurva to take it forward. Very quickly, let me first introduce myself and my organization. I'm Jasmeet Khurana. I manage the work on decarbonization of mobility at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We're a global not-for-profit membership-based organization of 200 of the world's largest companies. CEOs of these companies have come together to create a sustainable world. These companies together represent about $8.5 trillion in annual revenues. And you can think of it as a CEO club for sustainability, where the CEOs of all these large companies decide the agenda for what we work on. And one of the key areas that we're working on is transformation of mobility, within which decarbonization of mobility is a big part of the agenda. In India, we have set up a REI coalition. This coalition aims to accelerate adoption of electric vehicles in India. Our focus for this project, which includes 50 companies representing about 10 billion kilometers of annual mobility demand in India, of which 250 million kilometers has already been electrified. This coalition is working together to accelerate adoption of electric vehicles, especially around fleets, as well as bringing in private investments into the charging ecosystem. So for today's discussion, we want to focus on charging. India has about a few thousand charging stations and needs to grow that public charging network to about 2 million charging points by 2030. And that's a very big leap that we want to take as a country, which will require lots of infrastructure build out, lots of investments. There are three things that we have identified that we need to do that we'll discuss today. The first is to make sure that private investment is coming in, and whatever we need to do through business action, innovation in business models, as well as policy, we need to make sure that that happens. The second piece is that these investments are actually financially viable. So whatever needs to happen on the policy side, whether it's viability gap funding or interventions related to land or grid infrastructure, etc., these are being provided through policy. The second big piece is ease of doing business. So how do we go from 6 months or more than 6 months that it takes currently to plan and install a charging station to less than 30 days, because that will be crucial if we have to achieve the scale that we need to achieve. And third, and one of the most important ones, is how do we allocate land as well as bring in grid infrastructure or upgrade grid infrastructure that is required for this transition to happen. These are the three key points that we'll be discussing today. I'll pass on now to Apurv to take the conversation forward with our esteemed panel.
Sure, excellent. Thanks, Jasmeet, for the welcome address, and good afternoon, everyone. I remember us hosting an event at the REI E-Expo 2 years back in 2019. It feels great with some of the speakers that are already present with us today. It feels great to be back and hosting the event again, obviously on a very different virtual platform this year. But with that, as Jasmeet mentioned, the objective for our discussion today would be to discuss about the opportunities, challenges, and the related policies related to public charging infrastructure in India. And we are fortunate to have brought together a great lineup of eminent speakers with a good mix of representation from charging infrastructure manufacturers as well as charging point operators as well. So let me take a moment and introduce you to our panelists for the session. So we have with us today Mr. Avdesh Shah, who's Vice President, Photon Charge and Drive, Karthikeya Haryani, who's CEO and co-founder at Charge Zone, Mr. Krishna Sharma, who's Vice President and Business Head EVSE at Execom, and Maxon Lewis, who's Managing Director, Magenta Power. So thank you to all the panelists for joining us and to all the attendees who joined us online. Before we jump right into the panel discussion, I'll take the next 2 to 3 minutes to set the context up for the audience and just as to warm them up on where we stand today on public charging infrastructure, what has been done so far, and why is it important at all. So in terms of the importance for this, the deployment of public charging infrastructure that is reliable, accessible, and affordable is key to accelerate EV adoption in India, because it's something that will influence the purchase decision making of private as well as the commercial vehicle buyers and address their range anxiety concerns. And finally, the ability of the OEMs to sell more EVs on the roads. In terms of the market size, so currently there are close to 3,500 public charging points in India, compared to our global counterparts. So China has close to 0.8 million, and the whole of Europe has close to 0.4 million. So if you do a comparison related to our global counterparts, the market size currently looks a bit minuscule, but the opportunities in the sector are rather large. As Jasmeet mentioned in his introductory address, India needs close to 2 million public charging points by 2030 if it needs to align to its 30% vehicle electrification target. And this would mean a cumulative investments of up to 200,000 crores by 2030 in the sector. And what's promising has been the fact that many of the leading companies, some of them who are on the call with us, they have already made investments in this sector and are already testing the waters in this sector. And we have many charging manufacturer companies such as Exicom, Tritium, Delta, as well as many charging point operators such as Magenta, Photon, Charge Plus Zone, and Tata Powers, and many others as well who've invested in this sector already. In terms of the policy push, so the government of India has introduced many initiatives already. For example, the Ministry of Power started it with delicensing the charging business in 2018 and opened it up to private sector investments. Similarly, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs is formulating building bylaws for EV charging and has already come up with a guideline, a non-binding guideline for reserving 20% parking space for EV charging in residential and commercial buildings. On the subsidies front, so the Department of Heavy Industry holds the pen on India's flagship incentives scheme on EVs and related charging, and it has allocated 1,000 crores for deployment of public charging in India, under which 2,500 charging points have been sanctioned so far. And the key idea from the government is to create an initial skeleton network of public charging in metros and million-plus population cities, where there is at least one charging point that exists in every 3 by 3 square kilometer in cities, as well as on highways at an interval of 25 kilometers on both sides of the road. So that all of these measures by businesses and the governments is reflective of the fact that there is investments that happen in the sector, there is consensus that's shaping up within ministries, and there is the government stands ready to work with businesses to spur investments in this sector. And there's no reason why when the government can be so aggressive with their renewables and solar regulatory and policy push, why the same can't be implemented for charging as well, when it can have close to similar impact as well. Coming to the barriers, so since it's a new domain for many of the public and private charging companies, there are barriers that exist in this sector, primarily around the financial viability, like just we mentioned about the underutilization of charging assets, the ability of CPOs to be able to power their charging stations from renewable energy, the ability for them to access affordable land parcels across cities, as well as many other barriers that we'll hear from some of the speakers who are with us today. So with that, I'll stop here and we can now jump into the panel discussion. And my first question to any of the speakers can take this question, would be on how do you see this entire sector, the public charging infrastructure sector, play out and evolve in the near term? And what is your current viewpoint on the policy and regulatory landscape that currently exists in India? So over to you, any of you.
Okay, so can I go first?
Sure, Abhish.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, for setting a very nice context. Everybody is aware about the where are we in terms of the infrastructure and what holds good for this country. I mean, there is no doubt that decarbonization of the energy generation and the transportation, these are the two important sectors where the decarbonization has to happen. And for energy generations, this has already been settled, because now globally every country is pushing for solar or wind or whatever sources they have, CO2 free. So that debate, that discussion is now settled. That's almost a history, because now there is no way except for solar and wind to go, and no question of going back to the thermal in terms of energy generation. So that sector is, decarbonization of that sector is taken care of. So the important part is on the transportations. And in the transportation, they say there are three elements. One is the in the sky, so airlines, then the rail and the road. Rail globally is electrified. Except for a few stretches in India, almost all the sectors on the railway is almost electrified. The aviations will take some time, because that requires altogether a different form factor. Probably the battery might not be suitable, so there they might require some kind of maybe the hydrogen would be the possibilities. But it is the road sector where this battery-based electrification is the most promising. And globally, we have seen that, particularly on the four-wheeler passenger vehicle segment, this is the best suited way of electrifying the entire road transportation. And that would take care of a lot of, issues of the carbon associated with this sector. I would like to address the two things, where though Government of India has done a lot of positive things on the, on the policy front, and you have already enumerated those. But by virtue of the way we, we govern, we have probably inadvertently allowed to get the market distorted. That's the major challenge where the private investor would be facing, and we are facing. One is the access to the land, because access to the land, unfortunately in India, most of the lands, the public land I'm talking about, is either controlled by or managed by the government agencies, like the municipal corporations or a state PWD department, irrigation department, or railway. And the governance structure which we have, it doesn't allow them to deal with the private on a bilateral arrangement. And they, particularly for the EV charging, the government has not come out with any format through which they can give the freedom to these agencies that they can deal with these private entities as well, be it the tender or anything. But there should be a known format which can be used by the different agencies. Because of that, what is happening, most of these locations are getting accessed by only the government entities. And that's where I'm saying this is a very peculiar situation to be in this country, where the Honorable Prime Minister suggests that the government has no role to be into the business. And so they are divesting many PSUs. But at the same time, when it comes to the EV charging infrastructure, you are allowing only the private entities to come and, public entities to come in and set up the charging infrastructure. You are giving the subsidies to them to set up the charging infrastructure. So I think that is probably will not help the private investors, because that would crowd out all the locations, which is important for setting up the charging infrastructure. And that way the private investment will not look lucrative, in the long term. Initially, it is a loss-making propositions. If anybody is looking at a profit for the day one, probably then this is not the place to be there, because it is the infrastructure play and it has to be a long-term play. So that's one. So access to the land has to be normalized. It has to be made easily accessible to the private as well. And the second part itself is the subsidies, the nature of the subsidies. Giving subsidies is very good idea, especially for such sector. But along with the subsidies, if you are giving a mandate that the service fee has to be capped, it means you have a potential to artificially distort the market. You are fogging the mind of the consumer, because of this low, amount of the subsidies for 2 years or 3 years, you will be creating a perception in the mind of the consumer that, okay, fine, this is the fee which we should be expecting from any charging stations. Whereas that is not the case, because that subsidy is not taking care of what is the technology you are deploying, what is the locations you are deploying. So there are a number of things. So what I believe the government should emulate from the other part of the world, where they are providing the subsidies, except for China, where they had also started capping the service fee, which they have now done away with. But we take the example of Norway or London, nowhere the service fee is capped while the subsidy is being given. So that is the model we should be applying, instead of giving the subsidy and then distorting the market by having the service fee cap. Thank you.
Sure, Avdesh. I think that's very well summed up. And then basically removal of these artificial distortions and creating a level playing field for both public and private charging investors. I think that's something that's key. Again, my same question would be to Maxon, to Karthikeya and Krishna as well. Do you want to elaborate on some of the points that Avdesh already mentioned, apart from land as well as subsidy-related distortion that exists currently in the market and you face as a CPO or charging manufacturer as well?
Apurva, if I can go on this one. Right. So, fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, it's been 2 years. You mentioned about it. The interest has increased. I mean, we have a lot of. I mean, the same group continues to be as inspired as ever to set up charging infrastructure. But unfortunately, I mean, I reiterate what Avdeshji has said. We're still there in terms of the process, the regulations is concerned. The interest has increased, the number of vehicles has increased, but the challenges haven't been solved in the same amount of speed that was required. And I'll just talk about a couple of things. I mean, many people know about Magenta, but I'll just use a quick minute. We were always known as the charging infrastructure, the CPO, charge point network providers. Incidentally, we also have another service line which is called as EVET, where we have also a mobility platform. We run more than 100 vehicles right now in multiple cities. And when you look at it, when this tango, when you look at it from a consumer perspective of the charging infrastructure, I wish I could set up more charging infrastructure. That's the only answer that I can say. But when I need to do that, the constraints still continue to remain. Because like we know, I mean, there are 5 separate government entities which kind of govern, regulate the entire market, be it the service provider of energy, which is the power, one is land, then there is MAUA, which is housing and the things. So all of these things, I don't think that the intention is clear in terms of the FAME to subsidy being deployed. But I think the on the ground level, all of them coming together is still not in place. But I just, while I'm being also, I mean, I wish things could have been better. I just want to also reiterate one thing which has happened is the actual deployment of the FAME to subsidies, which I personally, I mean, I concur with Avdeshji that subsidies have always been a market distorter. But since it is already in, we are privy to some of the things that's happening is setting up of more than 2,900 chargers across India in 34 cities. Magenta has been mandated to do that under the FAME2 scheme. So that is available, but when you get down to the ground level, I wish Jasmeet, we could bring out that it's not 3 months, it's 4 months and 6 months to 1 month. So we have the players ready, we have the intentions ready, the capital is also available. I think it's more of these challenges. But having said that, I think one more point I want to talk about is the protocol. 2 years back, I mean, one of the first discussions is what is the protocol? I think now and 2 years ago, we kind of stuck our neck out and said the protocol will stabilize, just go with the flow. And it has. We know that's one protocol which has come in, which has made it a bit more easier for us in terms of a charge point operator. But I don't think that has gone back to the regulators who need to notify that, hey, listen, the world has changed in the last 2 years. The notification of 2018 doesn't stand. And hence, even if for the subsidy, for that matter, the PCS definition requires all the protocols to be installed, of which one of the protocols, there's not even a single car on the road. Right? So I think both ways, things are falling in place, but I think the regulatory aspect needs to be a lot faster. And I'll not repeat what Avdeshji has said, but that aspect, there's a lot more learning, there's a lot more understanding, there's a lot more data, and there's a lot more cars, or rather electric vehicles. It's just someone listening in and saying, hey, we need to run as fast as the electric vehicles can. That's where I stop.
Sure. Thanks, Max. And I think you raised multiple points. I think one of the interesting points is on charging protocols and bringing some sort of like a stabilization to the standards and charging protocols. I think we've got Krishna as well. So my question again, Krishna, would be to you, would be that how can we make these charges more future-proof, and then what policy and regulatory interventions need to come in there as well?
Yeah, so one aspect, the on-ground challenges what we are facing has been covered. So if you come to a charger, standardization, and even Maxon has already mentioned that protocol-wise, we are more stabilized now, and there is more visibility there, and it is now a bit easier to decide what to deploy, and FAME guidelines are clearly guiding us for public charging infrastructure. But the other side is like I would like to touch upon is the standardization, which is Bharat specific charging standards. So a lot of things are going in the background, and DST and the other regulatory BIS, other authorities are working to stabilize and formulate the charging standards like IS 17017. They are working, committees working, and I think by December 2021, they have target to even deploy, apart from part 1, part 2, which is already formalized. They're working on part 23 and 24 also, which is basically on standards related to dual gun, as well as further is the next level will be the communication, which is 15118. Probably that has been already freezed for dual gun, AC high power and DC high power. But the next level is even they are talking about automated pantograph charging. So as you mentioned that what is futuristic they are working upon is right now all type of vehicle except for light electric vehicles, mainly 2-wheeler and 3-wheeler. That's a gray area we are talking about. However, the going forward, the car, 4-wheelers and passenger cars as 4-wheeler, and the other 4-wheelers in commercial segment. So buses and trucks, I think they are broadly covered for futuristic things in terms of formalizing these standards under IS 17017. And not only for charging protocol, the EVAC standard for communication infrastructure socket and vehicle connector, etc., they are being discussed, and probably they have set up the timeline for December 2021. The gray area I would like to talk about is definitely in futuristic view, there is a lot to be done for 2-wheeler and 3-wheeler, because standardization is lacking there, and all the OEMs having on that forum when we are part of that discussion. So we feel that they still doesn't have consensus, and they have different opinions, and probably in near future it doesn't seem to be a concurrence between all OEMs and regulatory authorities. So I think a lot of discussions are expected in coming months, and definitely that has to be concluded, if not soon, but definitely in coming financial year. So that is the only challenge which I foresee, that all the OEMs, they are struggling to devise their own charge, vehicle standards in terms of charging requirement, and even charger OEMs, charger manufacturers are also struggling to comply to their expectations, and the market leaders like Ather, Hero MotoCorp, and TVS, all they have as of now their own standards for charging. So that has to be, because electric vehicle, if you talk about the major population comes from two-wheeler and three-wheeler in India, not only in India, it's all otherwise globally also. So that streamlining process has to be fastened if we talk about the futuristic view.
Thanks, Krishna, for updating us regarding the charging standards and the communication protocols. I'll now coming to you, Karthikeya. Being a CPO, how do you see this public charging infrastructure pan out? And then an additional question to you would be something that Maxon raised earlier in terms of basically fast tracking the deployment process from 6 months to 1 month. So how can that be done?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I concur on some points with my fellow panelist on various challenges, whether it's a subsidy or availability of locations, the land part of it, as I've just mentioned, or the protocol or the uncertainty on the protocol aspects and so on. But I guess let's, in order to reduce the deployment time from 6 months to 30 days is on two aspects. One is the standardization and clarity. Because as a country, we are always known for the only certainty in our country is uncertainty, as it is always called. And this is unfortunately now coming into the space of e-mobility as well, in general, the entire EV ecosystem. And the other aspect is the on-ground realities, in the sense that how under the PPP model, or public-private partnership model, how the timelines can be reduced in terms of deployment. The asking rate is very, very high. As Apurva, you mentioned in the beginning, that if you talk about certain million charging points to be deployed over the next 7 to 10 years, which means that asking rate is today and not tomorrow. Now let's spell out one thing very clearly. Why, as a country, as there are so much of bodies available, various bodies, ministries who are working in tandem to solve some of the most important problems. Why in an EV charging infra space, why certain things are still left open? We have asked the same question 2-3 years ago. As Max said, it's the same family of faces who have come on board again. Yeah, we have actually grappling with a similar problem today. Like as Max said, that again under FAME 2, he's rolling out several charging stations and several protocols are still there because of subsidy being there, and they want to probably be agnostic. But why don't we create EU kind of structure in European Union where they said fine CCS2 and Type 2 and that's it? Well, even the American automakers, when they're entering into Western European market, one of the biggest names as we know, yeah, has been forced to move from their own proprietary standard to one protocol. Because this certainty will help us to reduce these timelines. Because when you talk about uncertainty, which means that I have to go back to OEMs like Exicom or other suppliers or EVs equipment manufacturer, that their bandwidth is now put a kind of spread out across various protocols. It's the same kilowatt of charger, whether it's the 50 kilowatt or 20 kilowatt or 150 kilowatt. So one aspect, I guess, it is a need of an hour, is to bring a standardization. In the sense, live with one protocol per vehicle. Yeah. Now, for example, we have seen our experience that we cater as charge zone. We invest into charging stations. So we are also owns CPU for ourselves and third parties. When we have seen that a CCS2, and I'm very, very vocal about this. Yeah, a CCS2 has been followed by electric buses, majority in India. Recently, some of the new players like Green Cell Mobility and all have also announced to go with CCS2. There has been a GBT protocol, which is still a legacy, which has been carried forwarded by a couple of other OEMs. But now with CCS2, I can still use those charging stations for opportunity charging for the cargoers, yeah, who are majority going towards CCS2. For example, it could be Tata Nexon, which is an entry-level vehicle, though it's expensive, but it's still an entry-level vehicle in the market, followed by other luxury vehicles like Mercedes, Audi, and so on. So I guess one needs to be clear, and I guess we need to have some industry body. In fact, me and Avdesh, Max have spoken, again, it was in late 2019, is to create a body who can have a very single vocal representation to the government and very decisive one, saying that let us define a charging protocol. So this reduces the bandwidth which is being shared across all kind of protocol connectors and so on, which also means that it helps the EV charging equipment manufacturer to leverage on the volumes. Today we are dependent upon, and I'm sure Krishna knows from the shop floor point of view, there's a huge challenges in terms of lead times for various type of component. A GBT connector or a gun is different from CCS2 gun and so on and so forth. Now, this does not really help us to reduce this lead time. Lead time, it is not about availability of capital anymore, or even the locations for that matter. For a minute, I can also say, fine, no worries. If I am not able to get into a PPP partnership, one of my competitors who already got their entry, that's fine. I still have great other opportunities in other locations too. Yeah, but one of the lead time we have seen is this disparity and uncertainty caused, and this is also causing problem, as I've just mentioned, that the private investment, the private equity players to flow in because of the variety of issues that is being faced from the EV charging point of view. Now, coming to the second part is on the ground. Yes, I must say these are challenges which are global in nature. You can't do much about it. You go to a discom, you go for a grid connection. Sure, you have to take a connection. So if I'm in Australia, I have to go and apply for a connection for sure. So really, it doesn't change much. Fortunately, the discom, after a lot of reforms that has happened over the last 7 to 8 years in the country, discoms we find a bit more agile. In the sense that what thing we call it a Sarkari thing is now more agile, and this is a welcome move, by the way. Yeah, and we are able to see a similar response from a private discom, which is still limited to few cities in India, and government officer or engineers into a government-owned discom. We see the response time not very different. This has been our experience. That is in few states, few industrialized states in India, like the Western Belt, the Southern Belt, and so on. So, having said that, if you are able to tie down just 2 or 3 points, I guess the reduction in the lead time is not a very far cry.
Sure. Thanks, Karthikeya. I think all of you have very well summarized the key policy challenges that we face today in terms of standardization of charging standards, protocols, the land, the accessibility to affordable land to private investors, as well as the limited flow of subsidies that are going to the private sector investments in this sector. So I think you raised a really important point, Karthikeya, that can be used as a segue to our next question, which is on what needs to happen on the market rules bit of it. So basically, another policy challenge that we've often heard from CPOs and other charging companies as well is around the lack of clear market rules on who pays for the grid upgradation cost, whether it is the real estate owner, whether it's the charging point operator, the fleet owners, or the discoms themselves. And often we've heard CPOs ending up paying for the grid upgradation cost, which could sometimes be as high as the charging equipment cost itself. So and my question is to all the panelists, how do you see this cost being socialized, and what are your points on that?
Okay, so we will follow the same sequence. So okay, I will put forward my views. See, this is a much complex problem, I would say, in India to address, because having worked in the electricity sector for last 3 decades, I can say that because of the subject itself being a concurrent, a lot of challenges is coming more from the state side. Less from the central side, but more from the state side. See, the problem which we are facing it starts from the threshold limit for LT and HT. It all starts from there. And most of the states, particularly or incidentally, those states which has still the government distribution companies, they have incidentally a very low threshold for the HT connections. So, I mean, a couple of states where we are operating, the threshold is 56 kilowatt. Now, when you're talking about 56 kilowatt as a threshold, then beyond that, you will be going for an HT. It means that every charger, and particularly for now, since all the vehicles more or less is going for the CCS2, and there then the charging rate requires upsides of 50 kilowatt plus. So in that situations, you will be requiring to set up even one charger. Almost you are touching the HT limit. And apart from that, the challenge is that since that distribution transformer capacity is very, very low because of these limitations, most of the time we have been asked to spend the money. And the latest trend, I tell you, in one of the state, which we have observed, and we are suffering because of that one, that the distribution company is taking a plea that we don't have the transformer to give it to you, even if it is LT connections. Now they are forcing us to pay even for the transformer from the approved supplier of the distribution company. Now this is another, the expenses even on the LT side, we are being asked to pay. And in that, what is happening, normally I give you and how does it work? Suppose if the distribution company has a 25 kilowatt transformer and we are going for, let's say, 63 kVA because of our additional requirement. Distribution company normally provides the 63 kVA transformer, whatever is the cost, and then they take back those 25 kVA transformer, and then they set off the additional, the cost, incremental cost for this one. Now, in this situation, when they're asking us to buy a new, transformer 63 kVA, they are not even setting off those 25 kVA costs. They are taking back that asset because we can't, own that asset. They are taking back that asset. They are not accounting for the cost for that one, which otherwise they would have done if they would have supplied a 63 kVA transformer. So I'm thinking these are the things which is posing a lot of challenges on the CPOs, where these costs should have been, and not because that we are asking for the load, but as per the grid code, this should have been the responsibility of the distribution company in normal prudence business. And that's being forced on the charge point operator because we want to, make the life easier or make the EV adoptable. We are paying for this, but then we can't go too far with this approach. So this has to change, and that's where I believe that Ministry of Power, they must have a recommendation to the forum of regulators. I'm not saying because Ministry of Power can't, direct them, but then they have the power under Electricity Act where they can recommend them to or they give them the advisory that they should, at least for the electric vehicle charging stations, they should ask them to define a framework where the national level there should be a common HT limit or LT limit, and they should clarify who will pay for what. This clarity is very much needed. Otherwise, the CPO would be at the whims and fancy of the different distribution companies. Yeah.
Thanks, Avdesh. I think we'll now kind of turn the conversation around. We've heard all of these challenges, unless someone wants to kind of add to this. What I want to ask you now, you're all kind of smart business people. You're all investing in and spending your precious expertise on this sector. Let the challenges be where they are. How are you growing your businesses? How are you taking business decisions? What kind of business decisions and what kind of business innovations are you working on to overcome these challenges, continue to grow? And then in the next section, we'll probably come to what are some of the big ideas on policy that are the solutions for this. So I'll now kind of maybe move to Maxon first and ask him, Maxon, you're a smart business person, you're growing, you're raising capital, almost all of you are raising capital, right? And you're clearly doing something right. So what's working? How are you overcoming the challenges, and what are the prospects going forward?
Right. So I think, first of all, thanks. Yes, indeed. I mean, money is coming in, and not only to us, it's for everyone over here as the industry is growing. So what's working for us? I think first thing is we soon realize the CPO by itself globally cannot stand on its own head or in its own feet in this case, purely because there's a demand issue. Right. So for us at Magenta, we've created a separate line, business service line, which is also a feeder into a demand. That's point number one. Point number two, like I always used to say, you just cannot copy paste international solutions into India and start counting in your money. You have to invest in R&D. So supported by HPCL, we have invested a lot in R&D, which is hardware R&D and software R&D, both. All of it is in-house. Incidentally, we have the place, we set up a manufacturing hub for AC chargers. All of it is designed and made in India. And incidentally, the 1,000 chargers for one of India's largest fuel station network are actually getting deployed. So what we have done is we have diversified even before the business consolidated. That's working for us because that's allowing us a good overview of the ecosystem and to start, interconnecting these ecosystems and starting to see, hey, now we have the entire value chain, and then And that is also helping us in one more thing, is the customers are looking at as an end-to-end solution provider. Right? Of course, we don't make DC charges. We look to companies like Exicom and others to provide that. But on the AC charges, we've kind of built that capability in-house. We believe that AC charges is going to be a very quick form factor change model, right? It's not something which is standard. It's going to change incrementally. Every design building will need a different color of a charger, literally speaking. So there we have invested, but focus is on R&D. And I'll be very upfront, is the business is yet to come. While we are smart, we have seen that unfortunately the timelines have shifted, but it's time to stay invested in building the technology, building the processes. I think that's what is happening at our end. And I've always been an eternal optimist. If we don't do it, someone else will do it. So I think let's do it together. That's how I put it.
Krishna, how's Exicom growing? What are the tools or implements in your toolkit that you are deploying to grow?
In Exicom, probably our focus remained, working on to our internal strength, like developing full-fledged R&D center with, different teams for working on electronics and hardware, and then team onto BMS for batteries and software team. So we have set up. We remained, technology focused on, this ecosystem, and a lot of standards we have developed within our manufacturing. Developed in the sense adopted for to remain quality product manufacturer. So though the challenges we are facing, like it's not only charging infrastructure, we are into EV battery manufacturing as well, where we are definitely facing a lot of challenges, to remain at forefront in batteries. But of course, in charger, as I mentioned, that we remain technology driven. We worked upon a lot of innovative design and localization. Earlier, we used to be dependent on overseas components. So the entire product basket now is localized, and the sourcing also we have converted more than 70% within India. Of course, the electronics remains a challenge. We are still dependent on the overseas markets, and these days we are facing challenges in terms of supply chain. But otherwise, it was something market-driven compulsion that we remain focused on big chargers, high voltage chargers, majorly four-wheeler and commercial vehicles, buses, etc. So there we are finding ourselves a bit competitive, and whatever investment and technology we have developed, competency developed, is giving us good results. Though our focus was on to small electric vehicles also, but as I mentioned, we are very limited in terms of having our long-term OEM partners, vehicle partners, because of the reason is lack of standardization. So every OEM expects their own standards to be developed. So we are coping up with that because, and we are able to capture few of the market leaders in that segment also because of our in-house capability to engineer and customization. So this is how, as of now, we are trying to, be there as a market player with some strength on our capabilities, in-house capabilities.
Karthikeya, similar question to you. What's driving growth? What are the prospects going forward?
The prospects are amazing. The team is more busy than ever, I would say, and I'm sure that's the case with all the other fellow members and their companies as well. One thing for certain that we have moved from an intent to interest. There was an intent 2 years ago. Today, there's a lot of interest. The best part is that the way solar evolved. Now, today, we don't have to educate anybody on solar, electricity units, net metering and all. EV charging has almost started then. I think it's all due to more information available all around, which means that consumers, customers, corporates, individuals who want to adopt to EV are interestingly becoming more knowledgeable. They talk about protocols. They talk about a language which is unheard of, right? So unheard of in the sense that coming from the fossil fuel background. Now, at Charzone, obviously, building the technology to scale is going to be very, very important and as a priority, and I'm sure that is applicable to many players in the EV charging space. The second part, obviously, it's a focus on processes, unit economics, and how what you call as bringing in the capex efficiency on the ground. Points were like this mentioned about the grid infra and all. These are legacy issues which we grapple on a day-to-day basis, and we really don't see any short-term solution to that. But yeah, we are learning what is a more smarter way of working around and try to be as competitive as possible. So now the best part about what we have seen a turnaround 24 months ago and today is customers wants to put up charging stations. Earlier, it was all about large fleet operators, for example, and then obviously even WBCSD has run several surveys and programs and seminars all around, even fleet electrification being talked about and all. But we all know that the scale is on the consumer, the retail segment, which is still, let's say, 1.5 or 2 years away from what you call as a tipping point or inflection point to scale further. But yes, the preparation is now and how, because you got to be prepared with everything to achieve that scale. So as a result of that, now that the interest is so huge that people are asking proposals. Yeah. Earlier, it was not the case. People will say, fine, we'll dekhenge kya ho raha hai, because, and I think part of the problem is also automotive industry. Yeah. Well, to our disappointment, we haven't seen any announcement of new cars. Now, let's be honest about this. Like, I mean, the Indian market, as I still keep on remembering what Max used to say, that Indian problem, Indian solutions, right? And I keep quoting, that very, very often. But our Indian market is all about 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. But we need to keep in mind that it's a 4-wheeler which will bring the market to the fore, to the interest of the adoption. It is not always going to be 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers all the time. So once those cars announcement or the new model announcements start kicking in, I guess it is going to be a massive turnaround. I think we are going to hit an S-curve, I would say, as Tony Keba said, probably a few years ago. And he famously quoted Android and iOS in 2007 and how it was simply an S and how the future phones were out of the market. So we expect that to happen somewhere probably 18 months down the line. But yes, today the preparation is all about getting that we are now approaching the root of that S-curve to begin with. And if the growth is going to be vertical, you've got to be prepared on all the counts possible.
Sure. Thanks, Karthikeya. And that's great to hear about the optimism coming from all companies making headway in this sector. So, Avdesh, maybe we can pose the same question to you in terms of what's driving growth at Photon, and we'll have the last 5 minutes to discuss about one key policy, a recommendation from each one of you that can drive or spur investments in this sector. Over to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So for us, belief in two things. One is the Indianness, because we are not operating Fortum here as a European company. We believe in Indianness and the beauty of the Indianness. And the one aspect of the Indianness which I love personally is the working in the chaos. We are expert in managing the chaos. So unless there is a chaos, we are not expert. So whether it is a driving condition on the road, whether it is Indian marriage, till the last moment, you don't know whether the marriage is going to be grand. Everybody is running helter-skelter, but then at the end, you will see that the marriage is a grand success. So similarly, I believe that, here, I mean, especially, I want to drive Fortum, and I'm driving that way, the charge and drive, is that there would be chaos in India. You can't expect that the policy would be, as streamlined, as crystal clear as you find in Europe. And you have to navigate through these chaotic maze. So that's the one systems, which we have already imbibed. So that's driving us. And the second is, is that we believe that this is an infinite game. This is not a game for 4 years or 5 years or 7 years or 10 years or 20 years. This is an infinite game where the rules will keep changing. So you have to continuously evolve yourself. So these are the two philosophies which we are following. And we strongly believe that we would keep playing in this game. So these are the two things.
Sure. Thanks, Avdesh. I think that's great to hear about that. So we are coming to a close to this session, maybe in the next 10 minutes. So I'll have I'd like to hear from each one of you. Maybe each one of you can take 2 minutes to basically explain or talk about one key policy recommendation that you feel can spur investments in this sector, and then I'll hand it over to Jasmeet for the concluding remarks.
Yeah, and I'd like to qualify this question further, and I would say, what I mean, not just one policy ask, but what should the policy landscape be like to reach 2 million chargers, to make sure private investment is getting a return from day one, to make sure that ease of doing or ease of installing chargers is increasing, to make sure all of these things are happening. What's the kind of framework? What does the ideal framework look like? Or what's the wish list? And maybe we can reverse the order and start with Karthikeya now.
Yeah. So here we are, Jasmeet. Finally, we are with various EV policies, starting from FAME 2, going all the way to various state levels. State governments announcing more or less a customized EV policy. Now, recently, the announcement, to be very specific, for the state of Maharashtra or Gujarat or even Rajasthan drafting it, has just spoken about EV charging as well. Earlier, Delhi led the way with some grand initiative, which also was a benchmark at that point of time. And even today, it was on the EV adoption or EV level, but not much on the EV charging infra. So there could be one way to look at this is, can all the EV policy be consistent? For sure, we have one nation, one tax, one GST, but unfortunately, we do not have one grid yet. Like Avdesh mentioned, that there are various states with various different policies, guidelines, recommendations, and you name it. It's a lot of chaos, and we Indians, we thrive in chaos, right? But having said that, if the EV policy can come as a consistent, maybe some of the institutions like WBCSD or RMI and so on, some of the think tanks can lead this way and say, fine, let the EV policy, though it might be a prerogative of state government, can encompass that. It could be kind of a checklist, saying that you tick off all the boxes possible and bring fundamentally the EV charging infra into play. Because the first and only barrier for anybody to buy an EV, whether it's 2-wheeler or 3-wheeler, whether even he will do only home charging all his life, will still ask one question: is the public charger available? Whether he will use it or not, that's a different thing altogether, right? So if you bring one consistency into the thing, I mean, you cannot be, we are a very diverse nation, so forget the similarity part. But yes, the consistency in the framework will always help. So that is one important, I would say part of. I mean, I have a long wish list, but this is one of the foremost one on the top of the ladder. Yeah, thanks, Jasmeet.
Krishna, maybe you can go next.
Yeah, so a lot of points we have already discussed, but the only thing which I think already discussed, but would like to reiterate on, basically there should be one window solution, or the kind of help desk should be provisioned in all these while having connectivity issues or space, land acquisition, etc. So all policies are there. They have already specified many things. However, as even Avdesh sir also mentioned that while taking the connections, while leasing the space for deploying chargers, etc. So there should be something, provisioned as a help desk or as a single window where all these challenges could be addressed and help could be provided while designing your charging infrastructure.
Thanks, Krishna. Maxine.
There's one specific, I'll be absolutely specific to a law which actually exists. It's a model bylaw by MoHUA, which was a notification for making it mandatory for charging infrastructure. And I'm not calling it DC charging, large charging, it's for just small DC charging infrastructure for all new buildings. I just think of it, I'm just elaborating this a bit, is while the other constraints do exist, even if this bylaw had become a notification, while I do agree that states, all of it need to be aligned, but if that could happen, it will actually drive the biggest adoption is when I buy a car, and if I buy a building, I know I can charge. So for me, if that notice, it's been 2 years exactly to the day, that was it's still a model bylaw. I wish it had become a notification where the developers, builders, and I think it's that it may not always be the carrot, it may also have to be the stick in this case of driving that. And trust me, I mean, this is what I view, because we're working very extensively in that segment, the residential segment. If that becomes a requirement, minimum requirement for RERA or for OC, I think that could actually kickstart the entire adoption. That's something one thing I was hoping would have happened in the last 1 year hasn't happened. I'm being a bit specific, but I thought that this is something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, so I have very clear one ask from the government, but before that, I would also like to just give a pointer towards what I was indicating. See, because of the non-clarity on that, what do you mean by the charging infrastructure? I have seen the upcoming buildings are providing just the 15 ampere socket, and they are saying that they have the charging infrastructure in place. Probably that is not the intent of these guidelines, and probably I don't think that is where Maxon is indicating that you can just provide the 15 ampere socket. It should have a proper charging infrastructure which is safe, which is communicatable, between the vehicles and the chargers. Having said so, see, the clear ask from my side to the regulator is that please remove this service fee cap from your guidelines. This single thing will probably help the private operators, than anything else. We can manage all other inconsistencies, but this will distort the market, and that will be disaster for the private investment. So I think the simple one clause in the Ministry of Power guidelines, which says that the nodal states or nodal agencies are free to provide a service fee cap. That clause, if can be removed in that guidelines, that will be a great service for the EV charging infrastructure.
Sure. Thanks, Alpesh. I think it's been great listening to all of your wish lists in terms of bringing consistency in framework, bringing fund window solution for availing the subsidies and for related issues around the grid upgradation or related issues. Instituting building bylaws and removal of service fee cap as well. So we hope that many of these measures do get implemented in the near term. And with that, we've come to a close to this session. And let me congratulate you all in basically your leadership in your investments in this sector and for taking out time for this session and for the audience as well. I'd like now hand it over to Jasmeet for the concluding remarks.
Thanks, Apur. I think I would like to be much more ambitious in all policy asks. I would say, we've had incentives for rooftop solar, we've had incentives for all sorts of things. Why can't we have incentives for all chargers, right? Regardless of whether they're being put through tenders or through public procurement, through anything else. I think all chargers need to be viable. And today we are in a position, if we want to, and electric mobility is a very big kind of strategic bet for the government as well, right? So why don't we have incentives for all chargers being set up? We can decide if it is a shared charger or a public charger, the incentives can be more. And, we can decide all those elements. We need all charging to be economically viable and financially viable. Let's make sure that we are able to provide incentives for that. On the ease of doing business, let's make sure that there is like Krishna said, a single window. We've had it for renewables. We can have it, and because I'm talking about renewables here because we have a lot of our audience is from the renewable sector. We've had all of these state nodal agencies for renewable adoption, right? Why don't we convert them or add a responsibility to them to look after all the issues related to land, to grid integration, to all of those things, to make sure that there is one nodal agency for that. So let's have that. Let's do like even for FAME incentives, let's make sure private sector is able to participate. Let's make sure that there is a policy for land aggregation. We did it like SECI did a tender for government kind of procurement of solar power, right? Where they brought all the public sector companies together and aggregated their demand. And then there was a big tender, I think a gigawatt or whatever, to deploy. Why can't we have all of this, a directive given to all urban local bodies, state governments, PWDs, etc., to identify land? There can be a consultant which can be hired to identify land in different major cities at least, which is with these organizations, and do some sort of an allocation through a tender or through whatever process to bring land, make the building bylaws, kind of notify the building bylaws, make sure that at least corporate houses and other places are able to provide charging for their employees. Hotels are able to provide charging for their employees. You know, all sorts of public or semi-public buildings have chargers. We need all of those chargers if we need to transition to electric mobility. So let's be more ambitious. Let's be kind of, let's ask for all of these things from the government, and let's make sure that we, as a sector, we are getting them if we have to meet our target, which in turn makes sure that the country meets its own target of decarbonization of mobility and creating this new industry and transitioning its old industry to this kind of new paradigm which is something which is bound to happen. It's just about how ambitious we are, how fast we move, and the faster we move, the more kind of competitive we'll be globally, and we can truly make in India and make for the world with some of the manufacturers here. I'm sure that's their dream as well. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank all our speakers today, and back to Informa for any closing remarks if they have. Amit?
Yeah. Thank you, Jasmeet, and thank you, Purva, for putting up this session and bringing the whole ecosystem of the EV charging infrastructure in India. I'm sure we'll have a longer discussion when we are at REI in September. I would also like to thank all our panelists on behalf of REI for your time and for the share today. Thank you, and thank you for supporting REI and bringing the best always. Wishing the best to everyone. I look forward to connect at REI. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.